Canada is one of the most desirable destinations in the world, a land of breathtaking landscapes, welcoming people, and fascinating stories. But what almost nobody tells you is that behind this country of dreams, there are dark secrets and disturbing stories that few know about. Did you know that Canada is at war? That there's a bar where whiskey is served with a human thumb? Or that there's a place where visitors have to spend the night in the same place where prisoners were hanged? And speaking of disturbing places, what would you say about a town so small that it has almost disappeared from the map? An isolated village where young people and children die too soon. Today, Bello Mundo will take you to discover a place marked by tragedies and sacrifices that seem straight out of a horror movie. Number 1. Location and geographical data. When we talk about Canada, what comes to mind? Eternal snow, fluffy moose, and that famous maple syrup, right? Well, although these cliches are part of the package, Canada is much more than that. Starting with the basics, Canada is in North America and is simply the second largest country in the world in terms of land area. It is second only to Russia. To give you an idea, Canada's territory covers almost 10 million square kilometers. In other words, it's so big that you could fit the whole of Europe inside and still have room for a few parties. And the borders? Canada shares the longest land border in the world with the United States. To the north, the country is surrounded by the icy cold of the Arctic Ocean, while to the east lies the Atlantic, and to the west, the Pacific. All this creates a geography so varied that it looks like a natural mosaic. But look how curious. With all this size, do you think Canada is overpopulated? Not at all. Most people live close to the border with the United States, while the rest of the country is practically a sea of forests, mountains, and lakes. Number 2. The creepiest drink you'll ever see. Now get ready to meet the most bizarre drink of all time. Seriously, it's something that will make anyone think twice before ordering a whiskey. How do you like your whiskey? Straight, with water and ice, perhaps mixed with soda or sparkling water? Well, these options may be normal for most people, but in Canada, things take an eccentric turn. In Dawson City, Yukon Territory, the question you'll hear at the bar is, with a thumb or without a thumb? Yes, you heard right. There's a drink called the sore toe cocktail, which is served with a real human toe. That's right, a preserved toe. And it's not just a garnish. It comes dipped in your glass of whiskey or even champagne. Now here's the golden rule. To win the certificate of courage, the toe must touch your lips. This bizarre tradition even has a slogan. You can drink fast, you can drink slow, but your lips have to touch your toe. And where did this idea come from? According to legend, it all started in the 1920s, during Prohibition, with two rum-dealing brothers, Louis and Otto Lincoln. In a blizzard, Louis froze his right foot. To prevent gangrene, Otto cut off his brother's toe with an axe, and, like good bootleggers, they decided to preserve the toe in alcohol. Decades later, in 1973, a man known as Captain Dick Stevenson found the jar with the toe in a remote cabin and had a brilliant idea: to create the Sour Toe Cocktail Club, an exclusive club where the only rule is to touch your lips to your toe. Bizarre, isn't it? But the story doesn't stop there. In 2013, a daring customer swallowed his toe on purpose. He was thrown out of town and, years later, came back asking for forgiveness. And as if that wasn't strange enough, there are people who actually donate their toes to keep the tradition alive. Fingers lost to frostbite or other accidents end up in the bar's stock. What's more, swallowing your finger now costs a lot. Anyone who does it will have to shell out 2,500 Canadian dollars. So I ask you, Would you have the courage to join the club and face the drink? Or is this tradition too sinister for your taste? Let us know in the comments. Number 3. Canada is at war. Did you find the thumb story bizarre? Then hold on to this. Canada is at war. Or, well, maybe war is a bit of an exaggeration. Let's just say it's a conflict, but the kind that could be resolved over a barbecue with friends. It all started in the 1970s when Canada and Denmark got into a territorial dispute over tiny Hans Island. Think of a little deserted island, lost in the middle of nowhere, very close to the North Pole. It lies in the Nares Strait, a little piece of ocean that connects the North Atlantic to the Arctic and separates Canada from Greenland, that giant Danish territory that always looks bigger than it really is on maps. Hans Island is only 3 square kilometers. In other words, basically a piece of rock surrounded by ice, with no inhabitants, no natural resources, nothing that screams international dispute. Not even the Inuit, who are native to the area, whom you may know as Eskimos, bothered to live there. At most, they use the place as a hunting ground, and yet Canada and Denmark have been fighting over it for decades. Why? Because the maritime border between the two countries cuts right through the middle of the islet. In 1973, geologists and hydrographers tried to resolve the impasse, but no agreement was reached. Since then, the two governments have insisted that the island is theirs. And you know what's funny? There are no gunshots, bombs, or armies in this war. The battles there are more like a game of flag picking. Do you know what happens? When the armed forces of a country visit the island, they raise the national flag to mark their territory. But the flag doesn't stay up for long. Soon the rival team arrives to take down the previous flag and put up their own. And that's not all. To add a special touch to the dispute, the Danes leave a bottle of schnapps, the typical Danish drink, while the Canadians reciprocate with a Canadian club, the classic Canadian whiskey. It sounds like a joke, but it's real. A decades-long feud, and the only casualty here is the drink consumed during visits. Number 4. The oldest water in the world is Canadian. Let's talk about a fascinating discovery. The oldest water in the world was found in Canada. This happened in a mine called Kidd Creek, located in Timmins in northern Ontario. There, at a depth of almost 3 kilometers, scientists found an underground pool full of minerals and history. And no small feat. This water is a staggering 2 billion years old. Can you imagine? We're talking about something that existed even before many of the geographical formations we know today. And since the subject is water, how can we not talk about Niagara Falls? Remember that classic episode of Woody Woodpecker going down the falls in a barrel? Well, these spectacular waterfalls, located on the border between the United States and Canada, are one of the world's most famous natural wonders. But here's the curious thing. The Canadian side is where things really happen. The famous Horseshoe Falls in Canada receives 90% of all the water that flows over the falls. The American Falls and Bridal Veil Falls on the US side get just 10%. If you want a great view and maybe a free swim, the Canadian side is the right choice. Number 5. Bigfoot is protected by law. Now let's talk about something that mixes folklore, mystery, and unusual laws. Did you know that Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, is protected by law in Canada? Don't go out hunting the hairy beast, eh? The legend of Sasquatch is one of the most famous in Canadian folklore. It is described as a huge creature over 3 meters tall, with a body covered in hair that lives in the region's dense forests. The story of this mysterious being is so old that some believe it may have arisen from encounters with a gorilla or giant bear that has already become extinct. Curiously, the Sasquatch myth is not exclusive to Canada. In the United States, it's known as the Bigfoot. In the Himalayas, we have the white-haired Yetis. In Australia, they talk about the Yowies. In China, there's the red-haired Yeren, and in Japan, the Hibagons, which, apart from anything else, are described as having a terrible smell. You can see that almost everyone has their own version of the giant furry creature. Now, the curious fact is that this creature is taken so seriously that there are laws to protect it, both in Canada and the United States. Number 6. There are several hotels. When it comes to choosing a hotel, comfort is usually the priority, right? But in Canada, accommodation can go far beyond that. There, you'll find hotels that offer unique experiences, ranging from the luxury of castles to the gloomy atmosphere of old prisons. Starting with the Banff Springs, this traveler's favorite is simply a fairy tale hotel. Built in 1888, it is housed in a castle in Banff National Park. The best thing is that you can do practically everything without leaving. There are 11 restaurants, 14 stores, a spa, swimming pools, and activities such as horse riding, golf, and tennis. It's the kind of place that makes you forget that the outside world exists. An experience of pure luxury and comfort. Now, if you like darker adventures, Canada also has something for you. The H.I. Ottawa Jail Hostel in Ottawa. This unusual hostel was once a prison called the Carleton County Jail, which operated from 862 to 1972. Behind its damp walls lurk secrets, and it is said, ghosts. The original gallows are still there, shocking and fascinating visitors. And yes, you can spend the night in a cell, private or shared. Really? Between the castle and the haunted prison, I think I'll stick with the comfort of the walls of Banff Springs. Number 7. TILT Cove, the Cursed City. And while we're on the subject of spooky things, remember at the beginning of the video when we mentioned a village so small that it barely appears on maps? A place almost forgotten where young people and children died early. Well, it's time to talk about TILT Cove, a piece of land surrounded by mystery and tragedy. Located in the province of Newfoundland, on the east coast of Canada, TILT Cove is today an almost ghost village with only 4 inhabitants. That's right, only 4 people live there, treasuring the memories of a place that was once a lively mining town. But that past was marked by sacrifices that leave scars to this day. It all began in 1857 when Smith Mackay, exploring the region, met Isaac Windsor, a fisherman who used heavy metal stones in his boat. Mackay realized the value of the ore and, together with Charles Fox Bennett, founded the Union Mining Company in 1864. This partnership turned TILT Cove into Newfoundland's first copper mining town. At its peak, the village was teeming with life, with workers coming from all over to mine the valuable ore. As you might expect, the town grew rapidly. Houses were built around the mine, and the population swelled with the arrival of miners from regions such as Cornwall, England, who were experts in copper mining. Over time, houses, shops, schools, and medical services sprang up, and that's how a city was born. But as in any good story, the glitter of riches soon gave way to challenges and decline. Living in this place was anything but easy, especially for the mine workers. The days were long, the tunnels were cramped and poorly ventilated, and the working conditions were brutal. The candles attached to their hats were the only light they had to face the darkness. Ore extraction was done by hand, with picks and rudimentary tools, and everyone from men to children played important roles in the process. Yes, children. Unfortunately, this small mining town was no exception to the common practice of the 19th century, in which children worked side by side with adults. Many of them were responsible for so-called cobbing, manually breaking rocks with hammers to separate the copper from the raw ore. It was repetitive, exhausting, and dangerous work. In addition, some were sent to explore the narrowest tunnels, as their small bodies allowed them to access areas that the adults couldn't reach. The conditions were so extreme that the health of these children, and all the workers, quickly deteriorated. Continuous exposure to the toxic dust and gases released during mining led to the development of serious respiratory diseases, such as silicosis. In addition to the brutal working conditions, the mines were a constant stage for risks. Collapses, explosions, floods, and falls from great heights were part of the routine. Every day underground was a battle against the unexpected, and often the unexpected won. A tragic example of this is mentioned in the book Once Upon a Mine, the story of mines before Confederation on the island of Newfoundland, by Wendy Martin. In 1912, a landslide took the life of Francis W. Williams, one of the mine's managers and a respected figure in the community. It was a death that struck a deep blow and shook not only the workers, but also their families, who depended on the stability he represented. Number 8. Life outside the mines. But the dangers weren't just underground. Outside the mines, life in TILT Cove was far from easy either. Although the town had doctors, schools, and a small trade, the geographical isolation and unforgiving climate made everything more difficult. Food and basic goods were scarce, and any crisis in the copper market quickly turned into hunger and poverty for families. Everything in TILT Cove revolved around mining, and when copper began to run out, hopes went with it. The result of this can still be seen today in the local cemetery, where tombstones tell the stories of lives cut short too soon. Children, young people, and adults who rarely made it past their 30s. Number 9. The beginning of the end. The decline of TILT Cove didn't happen all at once. It was like a house of cards slowly collapsing. McKay and Bennett, the men who once brought prosperity to the town, ended up clashing. And as you can imagine, when the money starts to disappear, so do the alliances. Bennett, known for being ruthless when it came to business, took control of the operation. But this only led to more problems. Mining the deposit known as East Mine was one of the last efforts to keep the town afloat. But the ore extracted there had more sulfur than copper. This made the work more expensive and less profitable. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the construction of a local smelter drained the few remaining resources. Frequent accidents, inefficiencies, and exorbitant costs turned the project into a complete disaster. Then came the final blow. In 1890, a devastating fire destroyed part of the facilities. Rebuilding was expensive and time-consuming, and with copper prices plummeting on the global market, TILT Cove, which was already breathing heavily, was unable to recover. Today, it is what we call a ghost town. The few buildings that remain are in ruins, and the local cemetery is the only silent testimony to a history full of sacrifices. So, would you dare to visit a place like this? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoy exploring unique regions and stories that challenge the boundaries of geopolitics, keep following us. We have much more to uncover together in our Bello Mundo. For those of you who have watched this far, thank you very much, and see you next time.